Oops.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a journey into the unknown. The energy that surrounds us presents Riding Through the Unknown with your host, Michael Kopf.
And welcome to another exciting episode of Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael. And a little housekeeping before I bring on and introduce our guest is I have to apologize for starting late. Facebook has decided to take down my page, apparently because I shared out a post in October about a show episode, and now they're coming after me again for another promo for another podcast show, Paranormal Versus. Both of them are there. And so I am having to run all the episodes through YouTube now. And so I am having to find a way to reach out to all the guests that are coming on and let them know that everything is still on because Facebook has made me disappear for now. So hopefully they'll reinstate me. I have 2 appeals in. And so, with that being said, let us get to the great episode that I have planned for you guys. I want to introduce you to a lady who has more information about Hidden Bloodlines and the Holy Grail than I have ever met. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Rene Barnett.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. We got here hell or high water, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
I tell you, we've had a hard time getting this show to air, but we finally have done it. So that hopefully we won't get taken down off YouTube or wherever we're broadcasting.
Right.
I'll try to be nice and not say anything too controversial.
I wouldn't worry about it. They're already on me, so I
Yeah,
doubt anything else could be happening.
yeah.
So, for those who aren't aware, how did you get into the Hidden Bloodlines and Holy Grail and everything?
Well, I guess my first entree wasn't exactly, the Holy Grail. It was the bloodline uh, possibilities that I read in a book that came out in 1982 called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And at that time, it was written by three uh, co authors, Bajent, Lee, and Lincoln. And uh, at that time, it was the first time I think that I had been introduced to the idea of the possibility that there might be a bloodline of Jesus. But what really, really hooked me in was the idea that Mary Magdalene was much more than we may have known, or that she ended up being portrayed in the uh, the, the books that were left in to the Bible. Um, so it was exciting to me as a young girl growing up. Uh, just kind of, it's really weird to think about now because things have changed in some ways. But I remember always thinking, it's really better to be a boy. You get more, attention, accolades. And at that time, like in student government and everything, if you were a girl, you didn't really run for the president of student government. You would run for the treasurer or the secretary, you know. And so, of course, that's been a while ago and things have evolved. But still, it's, always thought, oh, it's better, and just kind of accepted that, boys were first, boys were better. They were, you know, like for instance, in our class, uh, there was two, and I grew up in a small town, so the class was small, and there were two of us girls that were like pretty on top of the class, uh, and there was one boy that usually made just slightly less good grades than she and I did, but he would always just get praised for it, and it was like, we didn't think anything about it because that was just the way it was. And so when I read that book and I started thinking, wait a minute, maybe that's not how it really is. And maybe, it's just as good to be a girl as it is to be a boy. And so that's what really attracted me first into that whole idea. And then, which of course, evolved into the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which, you know, uh, was purported to exist. So that's how I sort of stumbled into it or backed into it, I guess, into that book. Much later, much later, after becoming an adult and going through one career and then going into another couple of careers in the media, um, I had the opportunity to meet and partner with one of those authors, Michael Bajent, and we worked together on a television series that was to be aired on Fox. And at the last minute, the bottom fell out of that because they changed executives. So all the old uh, projects were shelved at that time. But I did get a chance to meet, and work with Michael Bajent. He came over for about 6 months to work with us. And then we went to France together to Rennes-le-Château. So that was my first time going there. That was in 2004. I'm sorry, 2014 was the first time I went to Rennes-le-Château, and I went with one of the authors of Holy Blood, which was like, wow, this is amazing. And for those who may not know, excuse me, I'm getting over a flu. Um, Rennes-le-Château is a tiny hilltop village in southwest France that's swirling in mystery. mainly regarding a priest that was there at the turn of the 20th century, and he found some things. He became wealthy. Uh, Things were hidden, and so this everything is rumored that he found, uh, remains of some very important people, or that he found documents or gold or something of great value. And so that little village, although I don't even know if it's mentioned, is really the heart of the whole Da Vinci Code mystery.
So, when you were in Rennes Chateau, you went into the tour, correct? So the tour Magdala, and do you feel like there really is a hidden room in there, or do you
Um,
feel like that's just hype to help bring people in and distract from the true esoteric history of the area?
I don't think there's a hidden room there. I do think there may be something hidden in there under it. Um, oh gosh, I think it was like the the early '90s, maybe, or maybe it was a little bit later. A group went over uh, with uh, with the network A&E. That guy, that presenter, Bill Curtis. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was on there for years. And they did some surveying. They did some ground penetrating radar. They started to do some digging, and then they got stopped by the city, by the village. So I think there's something underneath the tour. I'm so sorry. And
Oh,
then I
it's
think
okay.
there are some, special alignments. Like, for instance, there's a little window as you're climbing up the stairs. It's a small, fairly small structure. And, but there's a window that, as you go up the steps or down the steps, whatever you're doing, um, if you look out that window, it looks directly across the valley, which is La Valjew, the Valley of God, um, into this cave system over there, which I can't, off the top of my head, remember the actual name of the caves, but people have nicknamed them the Caves of Mary Magdalene, the Magdalene Caves. And I know that a guy who really kind of was early on involved in this whole uh, airing of this mystery, and who was indeed in touch with the authors of Holy Blood, uh, had indicated that this guy Pierre Plantard was somehow really, really involved and was of the bloodline, and was possibly, the Grand Master of the secret society called the Priory of Zion.
Right.
And Pierre Plantard used to spend a lot of time in those caves over there. So I don't know if there's still something there, or he thought there was, or maybe there's something important about that feature.
Location. Hmm. Now, it's interesting too, and I want to make note right now for everyone who's watching this. When we say bloodline, the bloodline that we're talking about is Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And so I just want to raise awareness to that so people don't think we're talking about like the kings and queens of Europe bloodlines. We're talking about a more deeper, more interesting bloodline. And I find it interesting, and I'm curious.
Actually, there may be some real connection with the bloodline of Jesus and Mary and the royal families that have, and this is just speculation on my part, but that may be the reason why there was so much uh, intermarrying into your own family to keep that bloodline as strong as possible because they felt there was something special about it. I don't know. That's just speculation, but they could have just done it for the same old venal reasons that a lot of them did, and that was to keep the wealth within the family, keep the power, the land, and everything within the family. And
Right.
that's, so it could have been for a number of reasons.
And one thing I'm curious your opinion of, and I don't know if you've heard of, but they talk about the last scion, which is supposed to be a descendant of Jesus and has a major impact on bringing about change to the world, like, signifying either his return or the end of times. But if Jesus had no bloodline, how do you have a last scion? And so, how do they keep that story in, but then say, no, there is no bloodline?
So, this scion is supposed to be of the bloodline of Jesus. It's not going to be Jesus appearing out of the ethers. It's going to be a child born. Is that the because I'm not really super familiar with that theory.
Right. That was the theory, was a child would be born who's of Jesus's bloodline, and it would usher in. But I was like, wait a minute, how is the church talking about the last scion when they say Jesus had no bloodline? So how do you have a child descendant of Jesus if Jesus never had a child to start with?
Good point. Good point. I don't know. That's a good one. Yeah, the thing of it is, though, is that even though they did try to keep that bloodline strong, as they do in many, so-called blue blood families, nevertheless, people did marry and people did, marry outside the family, obviously. And during the course of, well, I don't know if people know, but I did a film called Bloodline, which was a theatrical documentary that came out in 2008. And it was on this whole idea. We did a 5-year investigation into the idea of a bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene and a secret society called the Priory of Zion that guards the secrets and protects, the evidence or whatever. And so that's what we set out to do, was to try to find out if there was any validity at all or any real possibility that this bloodline did exist, and was, there a real secret society called the Priory of Zion, and if so, could we, crack into it? So we set about just to sort of learn for ourselves, and filmed everything for 5 years. And it's very tricky. It's like everything else. It seems like that these subjects that you and I look into, Michael, it's like it's always a rabbit hole. It's always picking up on a thread, and then you keep following it, and then it takes you somewhere completely different, and that sort of thing. So that's why we took a long time, and it was just a lot of information. But I think I'm lost my point there. But anyway, I did want to bring attention to the fact that the film is what actually led me over there to do all the research, and keeps me going back there time after time after time.
And I do have to admit, I have seen the movie, and we actually have the DVD copy of it. And it is a really good movie. And I think you guys did a great job of presenting the information in a way that you're left when you're done watching the movie going, some of that seems maybe far fetched, but there's always a tidbit of truth in something. So
Yeah.
it makes you want to delve deeper and go, okay, where, like you're saying, where does this rabbit hole now go to?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what we had set out to do. We didn't really assume that we were going to find the answers, all the answers. But we said, if we can bring in some new information, something new to the conversation to spark more of the conversation among people, and who knows what that will lead somebody else to find or do. And so all we really wanted to do was add to the conversation and spark more of it. And I think we did achieve that. I mean, we never claim to have found the answers, or even today, I can't tell you whether or not, after all this time, the Priory of Zion is a real organization. It seems like it, but there's no real proof. There's no real solid proof.
Right. And what's interesting too is my looking into and everything is there's a lot of similarities between the Priory of Zion and the Knights Templar in their secrecy and everything. And it
And Freemasonry.
always stuck me in the back of my mind of, why does everybody go after the Knights Templars and nobody really goes after the Priory of Zion? Because it's like, wait a minute, if you're going after one, you should go after both. And even in the movie, I liked how they would say, well, the Templars were in this area and doing this, and this is where they settled. And then you're like, and the Priory is here. And it's like, wait a minute. So is the Priory like the good side to the Templars' bad side, or are the Templars the good side to the Priory's bad side? It's like you're left wondering, are these two at ends, or do they work together? Are they just a faction of the same group?
Yeah, I think you hear so much more about the Templars because there's so much evidence, solid empirical evidence of their existence. There are records, if only, court records, where they were being interrogated, and they're probably not all true, but you can definitely get some information, like where they were, and
right. And they have churches all over, and so
right,
it's like you can stand in their space. But
yes, yeah, there's one Templar complex that we've located down there in southern France that just never ever is mentioned, and it's the sort of last bastion of the Knights Templar in France before they.
Hunziker.
No. You're not going to know it. I'm going to tell you, you're not going to know it.
Now I'm interested.
And I'm not telling it just now. We're actually going to take a group out there in the spring, a small private tour group. But I've been out there a few times. But it's a whole complex. It's a commandery, and it's actually the Knights Templar called them preceptories. It was the Hospitallers that used the term commandery. But there's a Templar preceptory. There's a chapel. There's 13 Knights Templar buried there. And they're just buried there in the ground with no markings. Of course, that's sort of the Templar way, to die anonymously with no confessions, because they'd taken, the oath of poverty. And anyway, but we know generally where those graves are, and we're going to take some GPR out there and locate them for certain, and then figure out a way to sort of, fence them off or something so that people, there not that many people get out there, believe me, but just so that people don't inadvertently trample them.
Right.
But yeah.
So that brings up an interesting question that I have, is because we keep talking about southern France, and I know it's sometimes referred to as the Cathar France region, but what in the times of early AD, before all of this really would be known, would bring Mary Magdalene to flee to France? What would be the draw of France, and why France when you're thinking they're over here in Israel?
Well, when you think about it, though, it's not such a daunting trip. It's not such a big trip just to to go across the Mediterranean from Israel. Or where's she coming from? Israel, or was she coming from Egypt? Anyway, coming across the Mediterranean to France, it's a lot closer than it seems like to us here in the United States. It's an easy trip. People did it all the time. Lots of trade was going on, doing it that way, coming over in boats. And she ostensibly landed in this place called St. Maximus, St. Baum, and they have a festival every year where they honor Mary Magdalene and go through the streets carrying this golden head of Mary Magdalene, and really honor her in that way. Some people said she came by herself. Some people said she came with a child. Some people said she came with children, and others said that Jesus came as well, and that which would have meant that he was alive.
Right.
Some people say they brought the body of Jesus over and buried him in France. So you can see that's where it starts to get at odds with, the accepted biblical version. Because, of course, if he had come to France, that means he did not die on the cross. If he was buried in France, that means that his whole body did not ascend. But, I mean, in my mind, this is how it could have worked. And I'm not the only person that's come up with this theory, but according to my research, Jesus and Mary Magdalene were members of the Therapeutae, which means they worked with medicines. They were therapeutic. They were, healers, but in a way using, herbs and compounds and things that were available to them. And there was a mixture, that could be given to someone that makes them appear to be dead. And so the idea was that maybe the Roman soldier that lifted this vinegar sponge up to Jesus's mouth, maybe it wasn't vinegar. Maybe it was something to not only, make it look like he had died, but also to alleviate his suffering. And I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying this is a theory that's out there. And, and something that sort of adds possible credibility to that, or at least doesn't take any away, is that normally people that are crucified are left up for days and before they're taken down. That wasn't the case with Jesus. He was taken down, I want to say the same day, or maybe the next day. But also, another thing that they do uh, when you're being crucified is they will break the legs of the person so that they can't hold themselves up, so that they'll die quicker and actually suffer less. Um, but they did not break his legs, uh, which was almost always done. And so I guess the theory is that they didn't break his legs because they knew he wasn't going to be dead. And then when they took him to the cave, uh, the tomb, he ultimately came out of whatever special potion he'd been given. And and then went on to, I mean, the people in southern France, the old people, the people that, it's, when you think about France, everybody thinks about Paris and posh and everything. And we're talking
Right.
about the countryside. We're talking about the people of the earth, farmers, and just regular people, villagers. And you know, you'll say, I remember one time, saying, do you really think Mary Magdalene was here? They go, oh yes, of course. And Jesus too, and the children too. They played in the meadow. And I'm like, oh my goodness. It was just a common concept there that Jesus and Mary Magdalene and their children had lived in the area. So
And one thing that
it's
I
just,
can
it
point
seems to be
out,
just a story, but
one thing to point out too that might, back up your story of, like Longinus giving him the potion and stuff is Rome had no issue with Jesus.
that's right.
They didn't want to triumph. They didn't want anything to do with it. And even at the trial, as much as everyone dismays and dislikes Pontius Pilate, his answer to the Pharisees at the trial was, "He has broken no Roman law. I am washing my hands of this. You deal with it." And so it was his own people that crucified him and
Yeah,
said, and all he did was say, "You do the punishment. That's it." And so they said, "Well, we want to crucify him. That's your punishment. Do it."
I wash
And
my
so,
hands of this matter.
yeah. And so Rome really had, Rome probably would have done stuff to help him because they had no problem with him and probably help him get away. And I also wonder too if France wasn't so much in Roman control too that he could be like, they're like, yeah, you can go disappear over here and nobody will recognize you and you can live out a normal life.
Yeah, I mean, could have happened that way. I think we just don't know for sure, and so all of us just keep searching for more answers.
Right, and I forgot about, the sponge. I knew that they did the sponge to wipe the head, and I always thought that was
No, it was
strange.
supposedly, you know, like to mock him because they they give them, sometimes they do give them water, that way so that they could have a sip of water. But the story went that it wasn't water, it was vinegar, to mock Jesus.
Right.
But maybe it wasn't either of those. Maybe it was something else entirely that could affect. It's like you go into such a deep coma or something resembling a coma, the heartbeat slows down to a rate that's not detectable, and eventually, you come out of it.
Yeah, and another thing could be too is he had already ingested what was going to cause him to go into the deep sleep, and on the sponge was the antidote, and it just took a day or so for the antidote to kick in,
Yeah.
and he was brought back because we
Right.
do have drugs that will simulate death, but you have to have the antidote in a certain amount of time, or you really
Yeah.
will die.
Yeah. You sure do. That's true. Yeah. I mean, they stop people's hearts all the time and then restart them, at the end of the surgery or whatever. So, yeah, it is possible to, pretty much almost die and appear to be dead, but then wake up, recover. So, but yeah, that place down there is just so full of all those mysteries, and everywhere you look, um, there's a Templar headquarters or a Cathar castle or just a Roman aqueduct, or Roman roads, Roman structures, just amazing. Because of course, we don't have anything like that here because we're as builders and architects, we're a very young country. So it's interesting to, like you were talking about the Templar locations, to actually go and walk where they walked and stand where they stood. It gives you much more, at least it does me, a much stronger connection to the past, to history. It's like growing up here, best you could do is, read a book about the place or, maybe see a video, but it's completely different when you can put yourself there. And I know it's hard because, not everybody has the opportunity to travel. And that's why so few Americans actually go across, because we're so far away. We're geographically challenged. And so it's difficult for us to get that same, at least it seems like to me, to have that same connection to the past that I find in Europeans.
It's right, because you go to like Montague, Puvert, Carcassonne, and a lot of the areas, yes, it is modernized, but the heart of it is still there. Of the
oh my gosh, yeah.
And so it's like they build to it. They don't tear it down and say, okay, now we can make room for apartments. They'll be like, yeah, the apartments on the outskirts of town, the heart of the town will stay the same. And they seem to live too a laid back lifestyle of, they open if they want to open. They don't keep normal hours. And
very frank. You sound like you've been there.
I was there in 2013, actually, 1 year before you.
Oh, you were there before me. That's right. Wow. It's so weird because I've been going so long now and so many times. It really is like, a second home, even though I don't have a home there. I have a lot of friends and I always stay with friends, but it's it's a whole different feeling. I have to say, when I'm gone a long time, obviously I miss home here in the United States and, my family and all that. But when I'm here for a while, I start feeling, like drawn back again. And that's where I'm at right now. But I won't be there for another, let's see, 4 months. I don't know, the 4 months to go before I'm back. But I'm going to go, I'm going to stay, 2 or 3 months when I go. My limit, according to their laws, is 3 months. I can stay without leaving the European Union and coming back in. So I'll stay 2 or 3 months, then I'll come home, then I'll go back, as long as I can make the trip.
There you go.
But it's
Flix Love in the chat room is saying in Egypt they did those spiritual tests, so they had that knowledge, past life experience, and that death itself was almost revered in a sense. Do you kind of feel like, that is similar?
what do they? I think they call. Isn't it? It's the far world. Isn't that what they call it in Egypt?
Yes.
Going to the far world, and so yeah, there is something uh, about that they do revere and honor. Um, I think we're coming around a little closer to that. Um, Although, I could be wrong about that. But certainly in my life, I've lost some really close people and just so painful. And you think, is this the way we're supposed to feel? Is there another way to look at this? Is there another? And the more I learn and talk to people, especially who've had near death experiences, and come back to tell about what they saw, I'm beginning, as time goes on, to think, wait a minute, that's the real life. This down here is just like a school we're sent off to.
Right.
That's what it feels like,
I can agree with that. And
like the real life is beyond us right now.
And I'm interested because, like, I always thought information was hidden from us, and I always thought it was, sacred schools or, something like that. But then a guest that I had on that's like a friend, Brad Olson, started calling it esoterics. And I looked at that and I was like, I love that word because it's like it's true information that's hidden from us. And I look at the bloodline, if Jesus had a bloodline, why is that such a threat to the church that they would go and, if you mentioned it, they would send squads out to make you disappear and silence you?
Well, I mean, I've only got my opinion on that, but I think it could be because it challenges the entire way that the church is set up, the entire dogma. I don't know why it's so upsetting, but people, I mean, just regular people would really get upset at the idea that we were saying, it's possible, in fact, probable, that Jesus was married because Jesus was a rabbi. It would have been unheard of for a rabbi not to be married. It would have been remarkable, and it would have been something that bore mentioning. The fact that, it never mentions that he was married, it would be like saying, it would be like stating the obvious. There was no reason to mention it because, of course, like every other normal rabbi, he was married. And so I think I think there's evidence in the Bible. I think, some years back, author named Margaret Starbird she's done several books on that topic. And what she had done, she was actually, when she started, she was planning to be a nun. And she set out to disprove this idea that was being bandied about that Jesus might have been married. And so all she worked with entirely were the canonical gospels. So she's not looking at outside anything that anybody's written as a matter of opinion or anything like that. She's only looking at the books in the Bible. And she believes that she's, found evidence that supports the fact that he was married. One of those stories being, I don't know if you're familiar with the wedding at Cana, where he turned the water into wine.
Right.
and but that story, she purports that he was the bridegroom at that wedding, and for several reasons, which a lot of them escape me. But the way that he was sort of presiding over the whole thing was indicative of what the bridegroom would have been doing, and things like that. But so, but when we mention that idea that, you know, he might have been married, people get all really bent out of shape about it. And that, I don't understand why. You know, I understand why the church leaders would, because it kind of knocks a hole in, you know, some of their theory. But just your average guy, you know, why would it be so upsetting? And it's not even people that were that devout or that religious, but it's like they would just get all like very offended by the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I was told like Jesus couldn't have kids because he was a divine being, and I was like, look at the Greeks; their gods had kids all the time. The Norse gods had kids. It's like, where do
Yeah,
you get the idea that a god
Egyptians,
can't have a
Egyptian
kid?
gods, Isis and Osiris, and you know all
Yeah,
those guys had kids. I
but
can you.
the other thing,
I need to apologize. Can you hear the dog barking in the
uh,
background?
it's very soft, but
Is it too horrible if I jump up and go open the back door and let him in so he'll shut up?
no, that's fine.
Hang on 1 second. I'm so sorry, everyone. It's so unprofessional.
No,
I'm the
you're
dog
fine.
lady. I'm the dog lady. Come on in here. My goodness. Okay, go sit down. Go lay down.
No, but what I was gonna mention is talking about, you know, how the Bible, you know, leaves clues that he was married. There was two that I picked on. First, like you were saying, him being a rabbi, because I tell everyone there were no honorary titles back then. You, it's like to be a rabbi by Hebrew law, you had to be married.
Yeah,
There is
that's
no
right.
exception. And the second one was that Mary washed his feet with her hair. Only a
Right.
wife washed a man's feet with her
Yeah.
hair. And the third one that kind of pointed me to that it was Mary Magdalene is that he's that's the only woman that we ever see him stand up for and say, if you're going to strike at her, let you know the person who has done no wrong strike first.
Mm-hmm.
And they all left. And it's like his way of saying, in my mind, I read it as, if you're going to go after my woman, you're going to go after me. And if you can only come after me if you've done no wrong. I know you all have done wrong.
Right. Well, you know, there have been, you know, other writings, of course, that have been uncovered, you know, as recently as, you know, mid 20th century, um, that have like the Nag Hammadi Library, the or you know the so-called Gnostic Gospels that were discovered in the desert in Egypt.
Right. And that Mary Magdalene even has her
47.
own gospel.
Yeah, and so there are not only, you know, is there a Gospel of Mary Magdalene among those, and these are books that they chose not to include in the Bible. And there was the Gospel of Philip, where they talk a lot about his relationship with Mary, or not a lot, but there's some nice gems in there. Like the other disciples were jealous of her because he spent so much time with her.
Right. And
He used to kiss her, and that they say, why do you care so much about her? Why do you spend so much time with her over us? And he said something like, I don't know what he said, but the gist of it was like, open your eyes. Can you not,
Yeah.
can you not figure it out for yourself?
I mean, yeah, because she was like the first official groupie, if you were to use that term. Wherever he went, she was there, and so
Right.
why
also,
would a stranger follow him?
Also, it's been well researched and documented that Mary Magdalene was never a prostitute.
No.
That she actually was a woman of means, and that part of her, what she did was, help to fund the ministry, Jesus's ministry. And so
And she was educated.
Right.
And so beyond that as well is, I find it, a little kind of like hypocrisy of the church when you can say, well, James was his brother. Oh, yeah, sure. He could have had a brother, but a wife is absolutely no. It's like, wait a minute. So it's okay to have a brother that's pushed aside and kind of buried in history and coming to terms, but the wife is no. We will absolutely not accept the wife. We'll say she's not a prostitute anymore, but we won't say she's the wife.
Well, I mean, as far as the Roman Church, the Catholic Church is concerned, it would mess up their whole deal if Jesus was married, because then why wouldn't priests be married? Why couldn't priests get married? And what happens when you get married, you have kids, and whatever you accumulate during your lifetime, you normally leave to your children. But priests are expected to leave everything to the church because they don't have kids. And I mean, and nobody can say that the Catholic Church doesn't like money. I mean, look at all the gold. And
I know. No icons, but they have icons everywhere.
Let's break off a piece of something and melt it down and sell it and feed some people.
Now, with your studies into the bloodlines and everything, did you ever come across rare text and stuff of where the church would be sent after certain people because they were suspected to be the bloodline of Jesus, so they would arrest them and they would be going after people who were exhibiting the possibility of being of the bloodline?
It seems like vaguely I heard something about that, but I'll tell you this. When we were doing our research, and I think it even ended up in the film, I'm not sure. We had so much, I've got so much footage that, left over from that movie because we had to keep cutting it down, and it's still a long documentary. It's almost 2 hours, hour and 47 minutes. Which is long for a documentary. But after, what was your question again?
If you were aware of or came across that the church would send
out. I've heard murmurings of that, but not really. Oh, and I know what I was going to tell you in that regard was that during our research, we found a professor at MIT who had done some work on something about the bloodline of Jesus, the statistical possibilities, and that if there was a bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, how many people would be in it today? And this professor, who was a mathematician and statistician, said that almost everybody would be, by this time, that almost everyone would have some, at least, far off connection with the bloodline. So, and I know that when you start doing your genealogy and all that, and start looking at your family tree, the further back you go, obviously, the more crossing over you're going to find, because there were fewer people and more people connected to the same families and that sort of thing. And I can certainly look back in my family tree and identify people that, if there is a bloodline, then they would have been in it, which by the same token means I would be in it, which actually means absolutely nothing, because there's nothing particular about me. And I made it a point to go around to and meet some of the people, the Sinclair family and St. Clair's, that were reported to be in the bloodline of Jesus. And while people were very nice, I couldn't find anything extraordinary about any of them.
Right. And like you were saying with, royal families, doing genealogy, I would come across of kings of England, France, and Norway in the bloodline.
Yep.
But listing out the kids, it's like the list can go endless, because they had bastard children, as they called them.
Right.
Or the children out of wedlock.
They had right. I always tried to get that son, and they had 15 girls, and finally.
And it's like, I look at the list and I'm like, I can't. You get lost in all of the who, were they kids? Were they not kids? The Royal Registry lists this, but this person says they have this test that says this, and it's like, how do you? It's like they've made it so convoluted. It's like,
yeah,
I had to go in and just wipe it and say, okay, grandfather, grandmother, grandfather, grandmother, through the royals, because it was like listing out the extended family. I was like constantly adding, deleting, and going, I don't know. It's like it's a mystery.
All we've been working with is just direct lines. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins, just grandparent to grandparent to grandparent to grandparent. It makes it easier. We're probably missing a lot, but it makes it a lot easier. And plus, it's kind of more interesting to see who you're directly related to. And in my mind, the only good thing about necessarily about being related to royalty or nobility or something is that there's actual information on those people, information that we wouldn't be able to get from our ancestors that were blacksmiths or cobblers, or because there's nobody writing and documenting anything. I mean, we might find their name on a census or something like that, but only the notorious and the famous can you get a lot of detail on about their lives. So to me, that's the fun part about finding that you're related to royalty or someone famous, is because you're liable to be able to find more information on that relative than you would just some poor schlub like us, working a job,
And
That's
Derek in the chat room actually brings up an interesting point I want to make sure we bring up is in the painting The Last Supper, Jesus and Mary Magdalene's arms form the sign of love. And he says that's Leonardo da Vinci's subliminal messaging. Do you find that that's accurate in the paintings, or do you think that's, I think they call it something where your mind matrixes
right.
into
Yeah.
like something?
No, I think everything is deliberate, especially in those paintings by those artists that were commissioned by different bloodline families, basically, and they had their messages that if you knew what you were looking at, you could pick up on it. But so I think that whatever was there. Now, I'm trying to remember. Does he mean with their hands, or does he mean in the space between them? It was like the V.
Well, I think they say the space between them is the Holy Grail.
Right. Yeah, that's what I
And
think that signifies.
I'm
But
thinking
what is it that
it
you were
might be
saying?
the hands.
It was the hands. Well, he did a lot with hands, Da Vinci did. He did a lot of paintings with this, and there's been a lot of speculation about what that meant. And I remember Michael Bates told me it meant remember John, but I don't remember what claimed of that. But yeah, very interesting stuff. Boy, Leonardo was something else.
And yeah, and he played a huge part in. I know, like, I mean, the Da Vinci Code's named after him. That he was putting a lot of subliminal stuff out there.
Right.
And
it wasn't just him. There are paintings obviously associated. Like with the Rennes le Chateau mystery, and like the Shepherds of Arcadia by Nicolas Poussin. Is a big one that's associated with that area, and according to some people, it is that area, and it's marking out something. It's the one that says on the tomb in Arcadia, ego, which people try to figure out what they meant by that, because what it translates to, it's Latin. It says and in Arcadia I, like, and I am in, or and I am also in Arcadia, or something like that.
I find it
is that Jesus is buried somewhere around there.
And I always find it interesting, like people looking at paintings, that have been around for centuries or decades and are like, oh, this is, there's this hidden message in this painting. I'm like, how do you see that? How does your mind go automatically into, oh, there's a subliminal message in this painting? Is that, are you taught that, or?
I think there are people that are taught to do that. For one thing, there is geometry involved in, measurement, and that's supposed to have some meaning. The angles, and could point to something, could be, could signify a location of something, or there's a lot that, of course, it's all speculation, because we can't ask those guys what they were intending.
Although that would be an interesting conversation to go, we think you hit this in this painting, and then, like, watch the reaction of, no, that's not what I meant. Now I need to go back and fix it so you get it right. And it's like, right. Oh, man, we just messed up all the artwork.
Yeah.
Well, we've actually gone a little bit over the hour.
It went by fast.
It
And
did.
again, I apologize for the dogs and the coughing and everything else. If I
Oh
ever come
no,
back, I'll do better. Thank
oh no, you're totally fine. And I want to
you.
make sure I get out. Here's your new website, info at newrennies.org.
Right. That's our email address. And
Oh, I thought it was the website. I'm sorry.
info at newrennies.org. And the website is newrennies.org. That's NEWRENNIES.org. And a Rennie is a person who is fascinated, obsessed, crazy over the whole overarching mysteries involving Rennes Le Chateau, which include the Da Vinci Code mysteries, the Bloodline mysteries, secret societies, Knights Templar, all that. But the nickname for a person who's into all that is called Rennie. So we built a site for the new Rennies to come and interact with us, and a lot of the original, most of the original researchers are now gone, and we want to honor them, and then also provide any new information that's coming out in that area.
And also, you have a podcast show.
Oh, right, I do. It's Friday nights on kgradb.com, and it's called Night Vision. This week I have astronomer Mark D'Antonio coming on. He's got a great, wonderful observatory out in the middle of the Arizona desert where he live streams, and you can sit and watch as though you're there and see the night sky. He actually had a live stream last night. It was pretty amazing. But he's just looking at everything going on in the cosmos, including looking for others out there that might be flying around.
Well, there you go. That sounds like a lot of fun.
So yeah,
I have some friends that call it sky watching.
yeah. His show is actually called Sky Tour.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Sky Tour with Mark D'Antonio, and so he's my guest this week.
So, besides going to France in a few months on that project, is there any other projects you're working on, or?
Just working on things with I'm actually a staff member at KGRA as well, and I do the monthly newsletter that goes out on the first Thursday of each month. We got a new one coming out tomorrow, and all you have to do is sign up for it. You don't have to be a member or anything like that. But so in doing that, working on some other events and things that are coming up. We've got a guy named Don Ecker, who's, formerly with UFO Magazine, and a great investigator, former cop, former special forces military, and all that stuff. And he's written a report on disclosure and why he believes it's not going to happen, at least not the way that, we're looking for it to, by the government coming clean. And he's offering reasons why it's not going to happen that way. So working on a project with him. We're going to do a little special event about disclosure. So we've got things coming down the pike.
Well, that sounds exciting, and
keeping busy.
I'm looking forward to seeing that because, everyone always has a specific vision of what they think the disclosure is, and then they're like disappointed that it doesn't fit that description, or that
just
everybody will give a timeline and the timeline passes and everyone's like, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to admit I felt a little bit that way after that congressional hearing. and they all promised transparency and more of this and blah, blah, blah. And now it's just kind of like fading into the background.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. But thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone in the chat room. And so from us at Writing Through the Unknown, we just want to wish everyone a blessed day, blessed evening, blessed afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Have a great one. Bye-bye, everyone.